Let us now see how to create a risk using workflow. Okay, so we know how to create a risk in NWBC, right? So if you go to NWBC, right, you go to setup and click on access risks. And when you click on create, right, to create the risk, you will set up, you can enter the details you want for creating the risk and then save, right? Now when you hit the save, the risk is uh, immediately created. Now you could also create this risk uh, using workflows, which means you can create the risk after getting uh, approvals as per your process. So let us see how to do that. So the difference is when you set it up for a workflow, instead of the save button, you will have a submit button here. So let us see what are the requirements, or what are the prerequisites to create the risk with workflow. So there are four right things that you need to do. Okay, number one, we'll close this, and then what you need to do is, number one, you need to set up a configuration parameter for workflow. Okay, so for the approval. Okay, so you go to SPRO and reference IMG, governance risk and compliance GRC, go to access control, and then click on maintain configuration settings. Now because approvals are through workflow, right? So in the workflow parameter group, click on new entries. You will have a parameter ID for risk maintenance, 1063. Okay, so click on 1063, pick 1063, and then say yes. Okay, so say save. Now let us quickly again go to NWBC and see what difference does this make. Okay, in NWBC. Okay, so click on risks, access risks, and then click on create, and see, instead of the save button, now you have the submit button. Okay, that's number one. Let me close this. The next what you need to do is, you can go to SU01, and then for the risk owners, okay, whoever is going to approve the risks, right, you can go, you will assign, let's say I'm the risk owner, the administrator is the risk owner. Now the risk owner or risk approver will need to be assigned SAP GRC risk owner role. Okay, now there is a purpose for this, which has to do with the access control owner in NWBC. Okay, that is why you need to assign this role. And when you create a risk, you'll also have to assign a risk owner for that risk. That is why you're doing this step. So the risk owners, risk approvers will need to be assigned this role. Okay, SAP GRC risk underscore owner. Okay. After that is done, what you would do is you go to NWBC. Now because every risk has to be assigned a risk owner, you will have to set up the risk owner in access control owners area. Okay, so if you look, I created two risk owners. Okay, so one is BC for basis components, other is for finance component, right? So this user IDs are these. Okay, so if you go to SU01, if you look at BC owner, right? So this is the own risk owner for basis component that we created, and that user would have the risk owner role. Okay. Similarly, if you look at FI owner, which is the owner for the finance area, you'll get the finance. The role, the user will also have this risk owner role. Okay. Now, after you assign the role, what you need to do is you will come here in NWBC, go to access control owner, okay, under access owners section in the setup work center. You come to access owners, under that you see access control owners, and then create the risk owners. Okay, so so how do you do that? You click on create, okay, and okay, so let me delete this. But I cannot delete because it's assigned to some risk, so that's why you cannot. But anyway, so what you could do is you can go click create and then search for the, let's say, the owner. Okay, you pick, let's pick, okay, let's pick this user ID, okay, and says assign the risk owner to that user, okay, and then just save it. So what you can do now is whenever you create a risk, you can use this user as the risk owner for that risk, okay, depending on what area, what business area the user belongs to. Okay, so if you see here, this is the risk owner we just created. Okay, now, so this is the third step that you do. First step was the configuring the parameter. That second step was ensuring you have that risk owner role assigned to users, whoever is the risk owner or a risk approver. And then third step you need to do is you come to access control owner and then assign the risk owner to the user. Now, because these are workflows, right? Approvals need workflow. You also need to configure the workflow for risk approval. So you go to SPRO. There is a transaction code also for this. Okay, so the transaction code is grfnmw underscore configure underscore wd. Okay, so you get to the MSMB workflow configuration screen. So that is a transaction code that we just saw. grfnmw underscore configure underscore wd. Okay, otherwise you can come through this to workflow configuration screen through SPRO also. Okay, now this time we are going to configure risk approver, right? So you select the workflow that you want to configure, which is GRSA risk approver. Click on display change. Okay. Now every process ID will have a rule ID also, okay, for the approval one. That is the initiator rule. So that is which basically dictates or specify what path to take for the approval this workflow will take. Okay. So you click on initiator and then check what the rule ID is, right? Process initiator is. So GR is a risk approval process initiator. That is your process initiator for this particular workflow, right? And these are all defaults, okay? So we are not, these are all SAP delivered, so we are not going to change any of this in this case, in this scenario. Okay, so it takes the process initiator, and then to decide which path to take, it goes to route mapping. Okay, so you have the rule ID here, the process initiator, and then it takes the path ID GRS, default path. So once this finds it, takes this path ID, then it goes to maintain paths. Okay, so GRS default path is there, and here you will have to configure the stages that this process has to go through to to complete the approval process. Okay, the different stages that this process will have to go through before the approval is done. So we only have only one stage here. So you select the stage and say modify. Okay, so and click on show details. And in show details, you have something called as an agent ID, meaning who is the person or who are the group of people who will be approving this request submitted to this workflow. Okay, so this ID information, agent ID information, is maintained in maintain agent screen. Okay, so you'll have to look for the agent purpose, right, which is for approval. So you select the approval, and when you click on modify, you will get the definition of the agent ID, okay, as to what is the purpose of that agent, right? It is approval. Okay, so what is the agent type? Okay, what is the agent rule? Or how the approval is going to be done? Okay, so you'll have to use this agent ID that is defined in maintain agents, okay, in maintain paths. Okay, so select the stage and modify, show details, click on the agent ID. So you get what you saw in maintain agent ID screen. Select that, and then you can select all approvers or any one approver. All approvers meaning anybody who's a risk owner, right, will need to approve the request before the risk is actually created. Okay, so we always select any one approver and click on save. Okay, and then you go to generate versions and activate the changes that you have made now. Okay, every time you make a change to a workflow, you'll have to save and activate the workflow. Okay, and anytime you're activating it, after making a change, a new version will be generated. Okay, so this completes the 4 stage steps of configuring, for risk ID creation through a workflow. Okay, so let's go and close this button. If you want to close it, you can close it because you don't need it anymore. Now let us go to NWBC. Okay, and now in NWBC, let us now submit a request for risk creation. Okay, so you go to NWBC setup, access risk, click on create. I'm going to say ZZ, okay, risk 001. Okay, it has a limitation. Okay, let's say 10. Okay, business process, let's say basis, and just give a description, basis conflict. Okay, let's give a description, copy the description here, use specify the risk level action, then you add the functions to it, right? So let's assume we are adding 2 functions. Let's pick randomly, okay, just because we are just giving a demo. Okay, let's put BS09 and then pick the second function that we think is going to conflict. Let's say security actions. Say OK. Then you go and assign the rule set that this will belong to. Let's select our custom rule set, right? And then you assign the risk owner. So this is where you need to assign that role and risk owner role, and then create the control owner in access control owner section, okay? Click on risk owner, and now you will see that user ID that we created, right? Sec manager in this area, okay? So you can assign that as a risk owner, and once you have, so now you have completed all the information that is required for creating a risk. So click on submit. So workflow is submitted. So risk ID that we are creating is ZZ risks 10, okay? Now before we go to approval, so we'll see ZZ risk 10 is not there, okay? So let's close this and we'll come back to that again. Now what would happen is the risk owners or the risk approvers, they will now log into JRC, NWBC, and go to access management, okay? And then they will go and search for the request, pick risk approval workflow and search, and they will find the risk request there, okay? And if you look at instance status, okay, so the risk owner is the approver also for the risk, okay? So this is the key here, right? So that is why you're doing the role assignment as well as creating the risk owner in access control owner section, okay? Now what the approver would do is you will go select the risk and click on administration, okay? And then you'll have the screen, you'll click on the path ID. The system will now give, you know, the details of the risk that he is, you know, approving or rejecting, okay? So you can go and check, or he will go and check the details. Obviously, he's the risk owner, that's why he's able to see this, okay? And then you can go and either approve or reject the request. So let's click on approve. So now the SOD risk is now approved. Now let's go to close this. Okay, now you go to setup, then you go to access risks. Right, now if you scroll down, you see the risk that the risk is now created. Okay, so this is how you create a risk using workflow. So you'll have to one, set up that configuration parameter 1063, assign the GRAC risk owner role to the risk owners. You then create the control owner in access control in in NWBC in this area, and then you also set up the workflow, configure the workflow that is needed. So you go to what you do is you go to MSMP configuration, right? And then you pick the process ID and go and basically maintain the path. Okay, if there are any no customized, no special requirements for your workflow process. Okay, now here there are one thing you can also note is that when you go to edit, let's go to edit, you can actually, when the approver is approving or rejecting, you can actually, select the stage and then click on modify task setting. You can actually force the approver to enter a comment as to why, whether is approving and rejecting. Okay, if it's rejecting, for example, now you can specify the reasons as to why he is rejecting. Okay, so you can do these things. Okay, so this is how you create a risk using approval.